I thought the UFC in 2024 was pretty stacked. The 298, 299, 300 run, I thought was one of the best three pay-per-views in a row ever. We had also the Abu Dhabi card, which was pretty stacked. 305 ended up being good. I thought 304 for an England pay-per-view, they made it as stacked as they possibly could. They got, outside of maybe MVP, every single fighter from that region. But yeah, overall, it was a pretty stacked year. I'm going to be going over every pay-per-view, what ranking it is, how it stacks up to the other ones, getting straight into it. UFC 297, we definitely did not start off the year too hot, to be honest. 297, I thought, was a little below average. In picks, I did awful. I went 4 for 12 on my picks, which is just awful. I got the main event right. Arguably should have got it wrong. But still, the co-main event, Pennington versus Silva, that was just abysmal. You had the Mike Mallet versus Neil Magny, that comeback. The start of that fight wasn't that entertaining, but that third round, I thought that may have been one of the only good moments on the card. You had City versus Rivera's, which was an amazing fight. But I believe Rivera's missed weight for that fight, and I thought he lost the fight. I thought it was a robbery, or not a robbery, but went the wrong way. I just feel like if you're in a fight, you miss weight, and it's a 50-50 fight, I feel like you should kind of lean towards the fighter who made weight. But regardless, it was an amazing fight. The main event was pretty good, but again, there's that robbery factor. Well, it definitely was not a robbery, but because everyone said it was, the Strickland fans were complaining. It just kind of took away from the actual fight. Curtis versus Barriute, that was a decent fight. It was okay. It was nothing special. Alan Evelev, I remember Dana said that this was like the worst fight ever. I did not think it was a bad fight. I thought it arguably could have gone to Allen, but again, not a robbery, but there was that factor of people complaining. All the Canadians lost. The prelims, honestly, were pretty bad. Nothing great. I think Jimmy Flick, if I'm not mistaken, got like an upset submission, I believe, opening up the card. That was pretty crazy. But overall, I went 4 for 12 on picks. I think the best moment was that Mallet fraud check. That was insane. City Tavares, easily the fight of the night. Best finish, Magny TKO. And I just feel like there were too many moments to count that were the worst. I feel like the co-main probably was the worst. That was not good at all. And overall, this was just a below average pay-per-view. It was not a good pay-per-view to start off the year. I remember being super excited because it was the first pay-per-view in over a month. And it was kind of a letdown, to be honest. I liked the main event. It was a close fight. Rematch coming up in about a month or so. But overall, this is a D tier. This is a D tier pay-per-view. It was not a good pay-per-view at all. Moving on, UFC 298, the start of a pretty good run of pay-per-views. 298, I went 10 for 12 on picks. So, for me, I just feel like based on how many picks I get right kind of determines how much I enjoy the card. Even if it's a bad card, if I sweep the card, I'm going to be so hyped. And this was one of those cards, even though it was a pretty good card. So overall, it was a great night. I get Volk got slept. That wasn't great at all. Whitaker Costa was a pretty good fight. Gary versus Neal was kind of the one bad fight on the card. Merab Cejudo, I thought it was an entertaining fight. You had Kopylov versus Hernandez, the two dark horses at the time. That was a really good fight. Dern versus Lemos. I think Dern stepped up on short notice, if I'm not mistaken. I feel like Tatiana Suarez pulled out. I remember I picked Dern and she got her ass beat. I thought it was a good fight, though. I thought it was a good fight. There was a lot of other good fights. I think DeLima won also. Zhang, I'm pretty sure, got the KO, if I'm not mistaken. I think Elliott versus Woodburn, I thought that was a pretty good fight from what I could remember. I think Woodburn at one point rocked him, if I'm not mistaken. Overall, it was a pretty good card. Again, 10 for 12 on picks. I thought the best moment was probably Merab picking up Cejudo in the third round. That was hilarious. Merab, he's a funny guy. That probably was the best moment. Best fight was probably Whitaker versus Costa. I think the worst moment was probably Gary versus Neal. And when they kept on dapping each other up, that was awful. That was a horrible fight. I remember people saying it was a robbery, but I rewatched it for the Shavkat versus Gary fight. It definitely was not a robbery. I thought you could have given it like 30-27 to Gary, to be honest. And yeah, I think the worst moment, obviously Volk getting slept. But Ilya, he's a fun fighter, so it wasn't too bad. I picked Ilya, so I was hyped I got the pick right. But overall, it was an 8 out of 10 card. It was a really good pay-per-view. It just was a solid pay-per-view. I'm going to put it in the A tier. I thought it was a really good pay-per-view. Moving on, UFC 299. I went 7 for 14 on picks, okay? So I started off the year not too great. Towards like the middle part of the year, I start doing a little bit better. But did awful on picks. It was a great card. A ton of hype. You had O'Malley versus Vera. Dominant fight, but it was a fun fight. You know, it was a domination, but it was fun to see Poirier getting the upset victory over BSD KO. That was a fun fight. Holland MVP wasn't the most fun, but, you know, again, MVP, fun fighter, so it wasn't too bad. Burns, JDM, crazy comeback. Peter Yan, Song Yadong, that was a really good fight. Prelims, Almeida getting TKO'd against Blades. That was crazy. And overall, it just was a really good fight. I think Michelle Pereira got a knockout or submission, if I'm not mistaken. Really good pay-per-view. A ton of fights on this card. And overall, I think the best moment, in my opinion, there's so many to choose from. I would say the Blades TKO, just because of how boring Almeida's performance was. You could also go with the Dustin Poirier knockout, the Sean O'Malley performance, you know, Peter Yan getting back in the win column. There's so many moments you could choose. The JDM comeback TKO. I think the best fight was probably Poirier versus BSD. It was a fun fight. BSD had a ton of success. He was winning that fight until he got knocked out. And I think if he didn't have staph infection, I really thought he could have won that fight. I think the best finish was probably the JDM because it was kind of a comeback. I thought it was 1-1, but still, it was 1-1. He was losing the third round. He needed a knockout. And on the judges' scorecards, he was down 0-2. So he did need the knockout. That was crazy. I think the worst moment was probably the Blades Almeida first round, where Almeida, I get if you're wrestling, that doesn't mean, oh, you're hugging, whatever. He actually was just hugging. He just couldn't take him down, but he could hold him against the cage. And that's the absolute worst. When someone is getting mauled, getting taken down, it's not boring. But when they have, it's almost like a Jose Aldo, Mario Batista, where they have great takedown defense, but they're not the best at getting off of the cage. So it was an awful first round. Great to see him getting TKO'd. And again, I thought it was an 8 out of 10. I thought it was an A tier. I think it might have been better than the Volk card. It's really close. I would maybe put it just below because of how many fights there were. I feel like when you have 14 fights, you're kind of oversaturating it a little bit, but still, they're neck and neck. Either one could be better. Moving on, UFC 300, one of the most stacked cards of all time, if not the most stacked. This was amazing. You know, the prelims, I was disappointed at first, but once the card actually happened, it was amazing. I went 9 for 13 on picks. I feel like the best moment, pretty easy. You got to go with the Holloway KO. I think the best fight wasn't that fight, to be honest. I feel like that fight is pretty overrated. I would say the Rakic-Yuri fight was the best fight. Another crazy finish. I think, again, you have to go with the best finish, Max Holloway, obviously. The worst moment, Sterling control time, kind of laying on top, horrible fight. But to make up for it, Yuri Rakic went right after. I think the Nickel Brunage fight was also pretty bad, to be honest, but it wasn't as bad. You had the Moicano comeback TKO. You had the Bobby Green, Jim Miller beatdown, Figueiredo submission, Lopez KO, Harrison finish. I mean, the list goes on. Armin, Oliveira, that was a crazy fight. I was pissed because I was rooting for Oliveira. You had the Pereira first round KO emoting on him. Zhang Weili, Yan Jianan, that was one of the best female fights of the year. It was an amazing fight. Very underrated, very underlooked. I have to go S tier. I just have to. I know a lot of people may disagree. They may think 300 is overrated. I thought it was an amazing card. I thought it was a 9 out of 10. I thought it may have been the best card of the year. We will see. But moving on, UFC 301, super underrated card. Again, I'm not doing this based on how stacked they are or how much hype they had. I'm just doing the outcome. And the outcome of this card was amazing. I wasn't hyped for this card at all. If I'm not mistaken, I think that they did have a press conference, but I feel like no one cared, to be honest. I don't even think Dana White showed up for it. So people really did not care about this card because it was not stacked at all. But it ended up being amazing. Overall, I went 11 for 13 on picks. One of my best performances. I feel like the best moment has to be that Jose Aldo getting his hand raised. Probably the third round. Really good fight. Kind of a boring first round. Second and third round were pretty entertaining. I feel like the best fight was probably Elvis Brenner versus Oralby. I'm pretty sure it was a TKO finish for Oralby, if I'm not mistaken. Again, a really good fight. Oh, actually, no. I thought it was it was a decision win, but I feel like he dropped him at the very end of the fight. The best finish was probably the Michel Pereira submission. I think he did a backflip before he got the sub, which might have been illegal, I'm not going to lie, but still, really crazy fight. Worst moment probably was Bonfim's performance against Vince, I forget his name, but still, it was meant for him to get a crazy finish, and I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, it kind of was a boring fight and kind of a competitive fight, so that was pretty disappointing. But overall, you had Pantoja Urseg. Not the best main event, but it was solid. Again, the robbery factor kind of ruined it. I picked Pantoja by robbery, though, so I was pretty hyped. Martinez Aldo, that was a decent fight. Pereira, that was a decent fight. You have the Anthony Smith finish, the Baralho finish over Paul Craig. Oralby Brenner, amazing fight. You had the Brito fight, where he got the finish. Dragar Close versus Silva. I think Close, if I'm not mistaken, almost got finished in the third, or he gassed out, something like that. But overall, I think Costa got a finish too. It was a really good card, tons of finishes. And again, I think you have to put it in the A tier. Maybe you put it upper B because it didn't have the hype, but it was a really good card, tons of finishes. But yeah, another really good fight. We had a massive run where it was 298, 299, 300, and then we all were thinking 301, it's going to dip down, but it over-delivered in my opinion. Moving on, UFC 302, this is where it started to disappoint. This was not a good pay-per-view at all. It wasn't stacked at all. I feel like there was a few pullouts. Yes, the main event over-delivered. Makhachev versus Poirier, great main event, one of the best fights of the year. But outside of that, you have Strickland Costa, horrible fight, and they made it, I hate when they make non-title fights 5 rounds that don't need to be 5 rounds. I don't think anyone was asking for this to be 5 rounds. Kevin Holland gets the first round submission, kind of a weird, where he didn't tap, but still it was an okay fight. Moreno versus Price, awful fight. Brown versus Dos Santos, I remember that being an okay fight. Almeida versus Kopylov, kind of a boring fight. Almeida versus Romanov, I remember that being a quick submission. It was like, even the finishes outside of the main event were, kind of not crazy, to be honest. Dawson versus Zaleski, not really a great fight. But yeah, overall, it just wasn't a good card. The prelims were meh. Main card was meh. And again, it was a below average pay-per-view. Overall, I did good on picks, 10 for 12. I feel like the best moment was the 4th round of Makhachev versus Poirier, when they start, staring each other down. They both are bleeding. I think Poirier has a broken nose. Makhachev has a horrible cut. Great fight. Best fight, again, main event. Best finish, again, Makhachev, 5th round submission, clutch submission. And the worst moment, Strickland Costa, awful fight. Overall, a 4 out of 10 card, in my opinion. Below average, and it might have been worse than 297. It's up there. Like, they both are pretty bad pay-per-views. And yeah, overall, it was not a good card at all. Moving on, UFC 303. this was an okay pay-per-view. Again, McGregor-Chandler gets pulled off of the card. Kind of disappointing. But we get Yuri, Pereira 2, short notice, which I thought probably was better. Because McGregor is just so beyond washed that I don't even care to see him fight anymore. But yeah, and you have the Lopez versus Ige. 1 hour notice, 2 hour notice, insane. Overall, it was a decent card, nothing crazy. It was above average in my opinion. I went 10 for 13 on picks. The best moment had to be the co-main event. Danny Ige stepping up on short notice. I feel like the best fight, there wasn't that many good fights, to be honest. There was a ton of crazy finishes, but not a ton of good fights. I guess you have to give it to the co-main event, Ige Lopez. That first round was insane. Best finish, you could pick a ton. You could pick the Peyton Talbot KO. You could pick the Alex Pereira KO. I'm going to say Joe Pyfer. Just because I love faceplant KOs, and he completely faceplanted Marc-Andre Barriou. Completely planted him. Worst moment, probably the Cub Swanson robbery. I feel like we all were rooting for Cub Swanson. He wins the fight, and that was a robbery. I'm not the type to call stuff robberies easily. That was a robbery, and it wasn't even a great fight. You had the WMMA fight on the card, which was heating up until the doctor stopped it. Ian Gary MVP was an awful fight. Smith versus Dolitzy was an awful fight. The main card was kind of underwhelming. Prelims were pretty good, though. You had Jourdain versus Silva, crazy KO. Talbot KO. Wonderson Gomez versus Robertson, that was domination. The Arlovsky versus Boudet was an awful fight, arguably a robbery. And yeah, overall, Ricky Simon, I forgot to say his name, versus Oliveira, that was a pretty good fight. But overall, it was above average. I probably would put it in the B tier, lower B tier. A lot of crazy KOs, which kind of puts it, above the mark. I probably would give it a 6 out of 10, but it's a low B tier. Moving on, UFC 304. I thought that this wasn't too bad. Main event was kind of whatever. Allen versus Giga was whatever. Not really. Two of those fights weren't really that great, to be honest. Pratchino versus Badiscus, that was a pretty good fight. The second round was absolutely insane to watch. I thought it was one of the better fights of the year. Pretty underrated. I can't believe that was on the main card. That has to be a mistake, but still. Wood versus Pineda, that was a pretty mid fight, to be honest. Makayev Cap was an awful fight. There were some quick finishes. Oh, I forgot. They didn't put on the Rodriguez versus Christian Leroy Duncan on this. That was a domination fight. It wasn't too bad. It wasn't the most entertaining, to be honest. Aspinall, quick finish. That was crazy. Overall, I went 7 for 14 on picks. In my defense, though, if I was making videos at this time, I would have went 9 for 14. I switched my pick from Makayev to Cap when they were in the cage, which I can't believe Verdict even allowed me to do that. And I switched it with Rodriguez versus Leroy Duncan. But I just thought that Makayev, he's too emotional. He's going to strike with him. He's going to get knocked out. One of the most boring fights I've ever seen. Went 7 for 14 on picks again. Best moment, probably the Aspinall TKO, the Hello John, the post-fight interview. Seeing John Jones crash out, that was amazing. Best fight, I'm going to have to give it to Badiscus versus Pratchino. That probably was the best fight. I feel like the best finish probably was the Paddy Pimblett submission, putting Bobby Green out cold. And then the worst moment had to be Makayev Cap. So underwhelming. Overall, it just was a 5 out of 10. It just was a mid-card. Nothing special. Main event, mid. C tier. But yeah, moving on. UFC 305. This card, I wasn't too hyped for it outside of the main event. But this card over-delivered. Main card was insane. Adesanya versus Duplessis, one of the best fights of the year. Kai Kara France getting the upset first-round KO over Steve Erceg. Gamrot versus Hooker. Hooker getting the upset victory in one of the best fights of the year. Tuivasa Rosenstrike, we don't need to talk about that. But Li Jiling, Prates getting one of the best KOs of the year. Tafa getting submitted in the first round versus Walker. That was insane to see. And then I believe Kulabai, He gets upsetted against Ramos. That was a pretty good fight also. Ramos, usually he's the one with no IQ. This time it was Kulabay. I hope that that's how you say his name. But it was a good fight. It was a good fight. O'Neal Santos was kind of mid. Jenkins finishing Burns was kind of expected. And the first fight of the night, Aguilar versus Nicolau, first round upset submission. Overall, it was a really good card. And in my opinion, because there wasn't that many fights, I thought it was better than all of those fights. And I enjoyed the card. I probably would put it in the S tier. I thought it was better than 298, 299, 301 in my opinion. Moving on, UFC 306. This card I was not hyped for. Dana hyped it up and it was awful in terms of hype. What we were expecting, we were expecting a stat card and we did not get that. However, this card over-delivered. Not only did you have the atmosphere from the Sphere, but a ton of the fights from, I believe, the second fight of the night to the co-main event was a crazy run. All amazing fights. Overall, 3 for 10 on picks. Of course, the card I start my channel on is the worst card I ever do on picks. No surprise there. Best moment, round 2, Van versus Charez. One of the best rounds I've ever seen live. Even though I feel like that it kind of was cheap for Charez because he landed, I believe it was a spinning back fist or something like that, but he was grabbing the cage to get the momentum. It was like when Leon head kicked Colby. He landed the shot, but he was holding the cage to get momentum to land the shot. But still, really good fight, rooting for Van, a lot of crazy fights. Then you had the Souza, however you say her name, she gets the upset submission in the first round. She was a massive underdog. Then you have Torres getting knocked out by Ignacio. Crazy. Aldana, crazy cut, loses the fight. Maybe the worst cut I've ever seen. Rodriguez, Osborne. Osborne almost gets the finish. Again, crazy fight. Zellhuber, Ribovics, arguably the fight of the year. Ortega Lopez, another amazing fight of the year contender. But what brings this card down so much is the first fight of the night, Rosas Jr., was not a good fight. But what really brings this card down is the co-main event and main event. They under-delivered so hard. The co-main event was one of the worst fights I've ever seen. It wasn't as bad as Nami Yunus versus Esparza, but it definitely is up there. Main event, O'Malley Merab was not a good main event at all. It was a bad main event. And I got my picks wrong, so I was pissed. But it still was a good card. It's just that co-main and main bring it down so much where I have to put it in the B tier. You know, I can't oversaturate the A tier. I would give it like a 7.5. It was a good card. It was a really good card. Wasn't great though. Moving on, UFC 307. This card kind of under-delivered. Pereira Roundtree over-delivered. I thought Pereira was going to get the first round KO. He gets it in the fourth. Roundtree has a ton of success. One of the best fights of the year. One of the fight of the year candidates. But you have Pennington versus Pena, which the championship rounds were pretty good. Overall, it was a bad fight. Aldo Batista, overall, horrible fight. Robbery, not great. Delitzi versus Holland, not great. Varela versus Harrison, not great. Thompson versus Buckley, crazy KO. That was pretty cool. Rodriguez versus Lucindo, not great. And a horrible robbery. I picked Lucindo. But she did not win that fight at all. And I remember Joe Rogan was glazing her, or Daniel Cormier, probably Rogan, like crazy, talking about how smart she is. And I forgot who it was, but someone was like, oh yeah, she's so smart. She just got knocked down, you know, she can't be that smart. So that was awful to see. And yeah, Spann, he got a quick finish. I believe it was a guillotine, if I'm not mistaken. You had Esparza getting a retirement movie or something like that. That was awful. Overall, I went 9 for 12 on picks. Pretty good. Would have went 10 for 12 if I got the co-main robbery right. Best moment, Alex Pereira, the fourth round flow state. That was easily the best moment. The best fight as well. Best finish was probably the Buckley KO out of nowhere. Worst moment had to be the ref during the Patera versus Almeida fight. One of the worst reffing jobs I've ever seen outside of maybe BSD. I forgot who he fought. I believe it was Santos. I could be wrong who we fought. It was some Brazilian. This was another awful reffing job. This was just terrible. Everyone was pissed. Really brought the card down. But Almeida was winning the fight. Overall, it was below average in my opinion. I'd say it was a little bit better than 297 and 302, but it still was not a good pay-per-view. I'm going to have to put it in the D tier. Not good. Moving on, UFC 308. Again, super stat card. Main event delivered. Crazy TKO, KO. Co-main event was shocking. I picked Hamzat by finish. I didn't know he was going to get it done that easily. I kind of wish it was more of a fight. Ankalaev versus Rakic, kind of disappointing. Murphy versus Ige was a pretty solid fight. You know, a lot of crazy moments. Shara versus Petrosian, one of the best knockouts of the year. Then you had Aslan versus, I don't even know how to say his name, but that was like a, if I'm not mistaken, like a 10-second TKO. That was absolutely insane. Neil versus RDA, kind of an injury TKO, kind of ruined it. You had one of the best fights of the year, Rebecca versus Oralbai. That was amazing. You had the Magomedov. You had his comeback submission in the third versus Ferreira, which no one thought he would get it done in the third. He gets it done. And there was a lot of good moments, you know. Even the first fight of the night, Renat versus Leal, even though it was a horrible robbery, it still was a good fight. This card delivered. I'm going to say it's an A tier. Now that I look at it, I actually think, I have it as a 7.6. I actually thought that it's better than all the other cards. I thought it was better than 298, 299, 301. Again, Ilya destroys another legend. Awful to see. But regardless, it was a really good card. Over-delivered somehow. Moving on, UFC 309. This card was kind of meh. Wasn't too special. Jones, Miocic, crazy finish, but it wasn't a good fight. And it wasn't the fight that people wanted to see, which kind of brought it down. Oliveira Chandler, it was a good fight. I thought it was kind of an overrated fight, kind of under-delivered. Still a solid fight. Nickel versus Craig, not a good fight. Silva, that wasn't really a great fight either. Plus, I got the pick wrong. I thought she arguably could have won. Showed no fight IQ. Rufi versus Lontop. I think Lontop may have got cut, which I don't know why. Steps up, short notice. Pretty solid fight. Over-delivered. Martinez versus McGee. Not a good fight. Martinez just didn't throw. Showed no fight IQ. Weidman versus Anders. I thought that fight got taken off. Miller versus Jackson. Pretty good finish. I thought David Anama versus Romero was one of the best fights of the night. Over-delivered. Really good fight. Overall, I went 6 for 12 on picks. Not really good. Best moment, seeing Oliveira get his hand raised. Jim Miller, his submission was also up there. There were some good moments. Thought the best fight was David Anama versus Romero. I don't know if they got the bonus. I think Romero stepped up on short notice, so they definitely should have got the bonus. UFC, they always give the bonus to someone in the main event, co-main, that's already a millionaire, and they never give it to the prelim fighters for some reason. The best finish, I hate to say it, but probably was the John Jones spinning back kick, the perfect spinning back kick. Worst moment, 5th round, Charles Oliveira, Chandler. It was an entertaining round, but it was so upsetting. Chandler, he always cheats. He was cheating like crazy, all the back of the head shots, and the ref not saying anything. Overall, 6 out of 10, a pretty mid card. Thought it was a little bit better than 304. Still, nothing crazy. Moving on, last card of the year. UFC 310, you had the Bilal Muhammad pullout in the main event, which I know Bilal said he wanted to be an active fighter. And people always trash Leon for being inactive. Bilal is way more inactive than Leon. It's so annoying to hear. Bilal has fought like twice in 2 years, and apparently he's not going to come back till May or later, I guess because of Ramadan, if I had to guess. So yeah, that's pretty disappointing. Overall, this was a meh card. Main event, it was a good, as long as it lasted, it was a good fight. First round was really entertaining. Gets the finish in the second round, but it's kind of what was expected. Co-main event, I figured it would go that way, but it was a pretty boring co-main event, to be honest. Gane versus Volkov. The first 2 rounds were pretty crazy. Third round was really boring, and it was a robbery that kind of takes away from it. Mitchell versus Gracie, for the most part, boring fight until the finish, which was pretty crazy. Again, it was kind of expected. Not the finish, but a Bryce Mitchell victory. Nate the Train versus Du Hoi Choi. That was a decent fight, but again, it was domination, so it was kind of underwhelming. Reyes Smith, kind of an anticlimactic finish. Again, it was kind of expected. And, what else? Luque, quick finish. That was pretty cool to see. Evlev Sterling, that over-delivered. That was a really good fight. Brown versus Battle. Again, not a good fight and a robbery, which you don't like to see. Weidman, Anders, an anticlimactic finish. Van versus Durden. That was a pretty good fight. Again, domination. Chiesa Griffin, mid-fight. Guida versus Hooper, solid fight. Kennedy, first-round finish. Picks 11 for 14, so I did pretty good. Best moment, probably the crowd getting behind Aljo. That was great to see. Best fight, I thought it was Evlev versus Sterling. Best finish, Vincent Luque, his Darce choke, if I'm not mistaken. That was a really cool finish, I believe, in the first minute. Worst moment was the robberies. The Volkov robbery, the Brian Battle robbery. Awful to see. Overall, I thought it was 6 out of 10. Some cool finishes, but nothing crazy. And yeah, I thought it was between 309 and 304. And yeah, I think that this is the tier list in my opinion. I didn't think there was anything too crazy. 310. Overall, let me know what you think. I think 300 was the best card. And honestly, I thought 302 was probably the worst card, if not 297. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you disagree with, what you agree with. And yeah, that is it for me.